Telling the time. The most important thing to know about telling the time is that you need to be able to visualize, picture what the clock looks like at different times of the day. It doesn't matter what your clock looks like. You might have a clock that looks like this, which has lots of information on it to help you tell the time. You might have a clock like this that has almost no information on it to help you tell the time. Or you might have a clock like this, which has some information on it to help you tell the time, and is most typically the kind of clock you'll see at school and you'll see when you're out and about. It's also very important to know what the parts of a clock are. The round part with all the numbers around it is called the face. And on every clock there is a long minute hand. In this clock it's blue. And a short hour hand. On this clock it's red. Every time you look at a clock, it's really important to be able to say which is the minute hand and which is the hour hand. The hands of a clock move in a direction called clockwise, and they always go in that direction because time is always moving forward. The first kind of time that we'll learn is o'clock. When a clock is showing o'clock, the long minute hand is pointing straight up to the top of the clock, pointing to the number 12. And the hour hand will be pointing straight at a number around the clock. This clock is showing 4 o'clock. But most importantly, I'm noticing that the minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12. This is because the last hour has just finished and a new hour is just starting. Try to picture when a clock looks like this and you'll be able to tell the time to o'clock. This clock showing 10 o'clock, and again the minute hand is still pointing at the 12. This clock is showing 1 o'clock, and still the minute hand is pointing at the 12. Always look at the minute hand first to decide what kind of time it is. Have a look at these clocks and see if you can spot any that are showing an o'clock time. These clocks are showing o'clock, and I can tell that because the minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12. This clock isn't showing o'clock. There is a hand pointing straight at the 12, but it's not the minute hand. This clock isn't showing o'clock. The minute hand's near the 12, but it's not pointing straight at the 12. This clock isn't showing o'clock. It's actually the hour hand that's pointing at the 12 and not the minute hand. And this clock isn't showing o'clock. Again, the minute hand is pointing near the 12 but not directly at it. Half past. After we've mastered telling the time to o'clock, we would want to be able to tell the time to half past. And just like before, we'll start by looking at only the long minute hand. The long minute hand is pointing straight down to the bottom of the clock where the number 6 is, and this is showing me that it is half past. This clock is showing 4:30. Every time the hands move, I'm always looking to see if the long minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6. If the long minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6, I know it is half past. This time is 10:30. The long minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6. I know it's half past, and then I can look to see that the hour hand is pointing in between the 10 and the 11. This is 10:30 because the hour hand has gone past the 10, but it hasn't got to the 11 yet. This time would be 1:30, and again I always start by looking at the long minute hand and checking to see if it is pointing straight down at the 6. The reason it's called 1/2 is because the minute hand has made its way halfway around the clock. It has made its way half of an hour around the clock, and this segment shows half of the clock. Have a look at these clocks and see if you can spot any clocks that are showing 1/2. These clocks are showing 1/2, and I know that because each one of those clocks has the long minute hand pointing straight down at the 6. These clocks aren't showing 1/2. Both clocks have a hand pointing straight at the 6, but in both cases it is the hour hand, and I remember that I always need to look at the minute hand to see if it is 1/2, and that the minute hand will be pointing straight down at the 6 if it is 1/2. 1/4. After learning the time to o'clock and 1/2, we need to learn how to tell the time to 1/4. This clock is showing 1/4, and again I know it's 1/4 because I'm looking at the minute hand, the long blue minute hand, and I'm noticing that the minute hand is pointing straight across the clock at the 3. When the minute hand is pointing straight across the clock at the 3, it's 1/4. Then I can look at the hour hand to find out the time. It's really important that we also look to check before we decide if it's 1/4. Well, is it an o'clock or is it a 1/2 time? Because we've already learnt how to tell the time for those. This clock's showing 10:15. It's showing the long minute hand pointing straight at the 3, so I know it is a 1/4 time, and the short hour hand is pointing a little bit past the 10, so it's 10:15. This time would be 1:15, and again I start by looking at the minute hand to check, is it pointing straight across the clock at the 3? If it is, then it's a 1/4 time, and then I can look at the hour hand to see that it's 1:15. The reason it's called 1/4 is because if we split the clock into 4 equal parts, they will be quarters. And those 4 quarters, we can see that the blue minute hand has moved 1/4 of the way through the hour. So 1/4 of the hour has passed, it is 1/4. Have a look at these clocks and see if you can spot any clocks that are showing 1/4, remembering to look carefully at the minute hand to see if it is pointing straight across the clock at the number 3. These clocks are showing 1/4, and I know that because all of those clocks have the long minute hand pointing straight across the clock at the number 3. 1/4 of the hour has passed to show that the minute hand has now made its way round 1/4 of the clock. These clocks aren't showing 1/4. Remember to check the minute hand first. Looking at this first clock, I can see that this is a 1/2 time because the minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6. This second clock, I can see it is an o'clock time because the minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12. And even though the hour hand is pointing at the 3, it's 3 o'clock. And the third clock, I can see again that the minute hand is pointing straight down at the 6. This is a good example where we always look at the minute hand first before worrying about what the hour hand's doing. And if the minute hand is pointing straight at the 6, we know it's half past. If the minute hand is pointing straight at the 12, we know it's o'clock. And if the minute hand is pointing straight at the 3, we know it's quarter past. Quarter to. So now that we've learnt to tell the time for o'clock, half past and quarter past, we're now going to be looking at quarter to. Quarter to is when there is a quarter of an hour left until the hour is finished. And so when we say to, we're meaning that it's going to the next hour. That's why the minute hand for quarter to is pointing on this side of the clock. We remember that clockwise means that the hands move always in a clockwise direction. So the long minute hand is pointing at the 9. It's got a quarter of the clock still to go. On this clock, it would be quarter to 2. Quarter of an hour left until it is 2 o'clock. This would be quarter to 8. And again, at quarter to, I see the long minute hand is pointing across the clock at the 9. And then you can see that the hour hand is almost at the 8, but not quite. So this would be quarter to 8. And now the minute hand is still pointing at the 9. So I know it's a quarter to time. But the hour hand now is almost at the 11. So it would be quarter to 11. Just like all the other times, it's really important that we look carefully at where the minute hand is pointing. And remember that if the minute hand is pointing straight across the clock at the 9, then it is a quarter to time. And just like before, we can see that if we split the clock into quarters, there are 4 quarters. But when it's quarter to, we can see that there is a quarter of the clock still to go. So it is a quarter to the next hour. Once the minute hand has moved around the final quarter of the clock, it will be the next hour. Have a look at these clocks and see if you can spot any that are showing a quarter to time. And again, you might want to pause it to have a think, and then I'll show you which ones are. Okay, so the clocks in green are all showing quarter to. And that's because on all of those clocks, the long minute hand is pointing straight across the clock at the 9. On the 2 clocks in orange, the long minute hand is pointing at the 3 in the top one. And that means that that is a quarter past time. A quarter of the hour has passed. There isn't a quarter of the hour left to go. And then the last clock underneath in orange, well, there is a hand pointing at the 9, but the minute hand that I should always start with is pointing straight up at the 12. And I know when the minute hand is pointing straight up at the 12, it's an o'clock time. I can see on that clock it would be 9 o'clock. Okay, and now we're ready to move on to 5-minute intervals. And we're going to concentrate on 5 minutes past. And an interval is a space between something, so we're interested in the spaces that are 5 minutes each. So I can see at the moment I have my clock with my long minute hand pointing straight up at the 12, so this would be an o'clock time. And then around the clock there's all these little marks, and those little marks each represent 1 minute. And if I counted all the way around all those marks, there would be 60, and there are 60 minutes in 1 hour. And then I can look at this part and say there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those little marks. And so that represents 5 minutes. And so each section like that of the clock represents 5 minutes. And I can watch as the minute hand moves. So it moves 1 minute at a time. 2, 3, 4, 5. The minute hand has moved 5 minutes. It would be 5 minutes past. Then the hour hand tells us that it's 5 minutes past, in this case 5 minutes past 2. The minute hand keeps moving around the clock. We're interested in the 5-minute intervals. So this would be one group of 5 minutes, 2 groups of 5 minutes, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups of 5 minutes. Each part of those is a section showing 5 minutes. That's the 5-minute interval. And some clocks even have the minutes written on them, particularly clocks for practicing telling the time. So I can use a picture to help me remember, well, when the long minute hand is pointing at this part of the clock, that's one group of 5, so 5 minutes have passed. When the minute hand is pointing at this part of the clock, that's 1, 2 groups of 5, so 10 minutes have passed. 5 times 2 equals 10. And I can use my times table facts to help me with telling the time, or I could count in 5s. 5, 10. 10 minutes past. And here the long minute hand is pointing at the 4, but we need to remember that the 4 is to do with the hours, and the long minute hand is to do with minutes. So while I can use the 4 to remind me that it's 4 groups of 5, I should never say it's 4 minutes past, because that number 4 has got nothing to do with the minutes. I can see on this clock it would be 20 minutes past, and I could count that in 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20. 5 times 4 equals 20, or maybe I just know that 5 times 4 equals 20, and so that would be 20 minutes past. So have a look at these 3 clocks. This time we need to work out what the time is on each clock, and I want you just to concentrate on the minute hand to start with. So on this first clock in the top left, I can see that the long minute hand is pointing straight at the 5. And I know that that means 5 groups of 5 minutes. The minute hand has travelled around the clock to that part. So I know that 5 times 5 is 25, or I could count in 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. 25 minutes past, and then I can see that the hour hand has gone past the 6, but not got to the 7. It would be 25 past 6. On this second clock, I can see that the long minute hand is pointing straight at the 1. So one group of 5 minutes has passed. So it would be 5 past. And in this case, I can see that the hour hand is just a tiny little bit past the 12. So it would be 5 past 12. And last of all, I can see that the long minute hand is pointing straight at the 2, and I need to remember that doesn't mean 2 minutes, it means 2 groups of 5 minutes. And I could count in 5s, 5, 10, or perhaps I know that 5 times 2 is 10, so this is 10 minutes past. I can see that the hour hand is just after the 5, so it would be 10 minutes past 5. 5. Okay, just like lots of the other parts of telling the time, us having a good idea of how a clock works and what it looks like to help us visualize what's happening is the most important skill we have for telling the time. This clock doesn't have any hands on it. We're just going to concentrate on using it to think about times that are past the hour and times that are to the hour. All the times in this blue section, this blue half of the clock, are past times. So if the minute hand is in any part of that blue part of the clock, it will be a something past time. And all the parts in this red half of the clock are to times. Any time the minute hand is in any of the red part, it will be a to time. And the way we can think of this is that in the past part of the clock, the minute hand is moving around towards half past. It starts at 12 when no minutes have passed, and then it moves around the clock in a clockwise direction until it is half past. Then, after half past, the minute hand on the clock starts to move back towards the end of the hour. It carries on around the clock towards 12. And so before we think about anything else, we just want to be confident that we can tell whether a time is a past or a to time. So here, the minute hand is on the past side of the clock, so it's something past. Here, the minute hand is on the to side of the clock, so it's something to. Still on the to side of the clock, and that's why we say quarter to when the minute hand is pointing straight across at the 9, because there is a quarter of the hour to the end of the hour. Still on the to side, only just, but it's still on the to side of the clock. And here, still on the past side, but only just. So it's really important to be able to visualize that line down the middle of the clock, separating it in half, and remembering that the first half of an hour are the past times, and the second half of an hour are the to times. Last of all, we're going to look at 5-minute intervals to the hour. So first of all, we need to again picture the part of the clock where all of the times that are to the hour are. Just like before, the minute hand will move 1 minute at a time, making its way back to the end of the hour, working all the way back until the minute hand is pointing straight back up at the 12 again to an o'clock time. On this clock, I can see that the long minute hand is pointing at the mark where the 7 is. And I need to remember that the 7 is to do with hours, so it doesn't tell me how many minutes there are. It's not 7 minutes past or 7 minutes to. It might help me to work out how many groups of 5 minutes there are. And just like before, each part of this side of the clock, the to side, is made up of 5-minute intervals. On this side of the clock, we work our way back towards 0. So being able to count in 5s on the past side of the clock, we can use the same idea, but we need to better count down in 5s on the to side of the clock. So I can see at the moment that the long minute hand is pointing at the part that says 25 minutes to. And the reason for that is there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sections of the clock still to go, and 5 times 5 is 25. So it's 25 minutes to. And then I could look at the hour hand and see that it's 25 minutes to 2. Here I can see that there is now 4 sections of the clock still to go. And I know that 5 times 4 is 20 minutes. So there are 20 minutes to the end of this hour. So it would be 20 minutes to 2. And finally, I can see there is now only 2 sections of the clock left to go. So I know that 5 times 2 is 10, so there are 10 minutes left until the new hour, so it would be 10 minutes to 2. And it's important to note that the 10 on the big part of the clock has nothing to do with the minutes. That's not the reason it's 10 minutes to. It's that there's 2 sections of 5 minutes and that 5 times 2 equals 10. So finally have a look at these last 3 clocks to see if you can work out what the time is. All of these clocks are 2 times. And again, you might want to pause it so you can have a think about it as you go. Okay, this first clock on the top left, I can see that the minute hand is pointing straight to where the 8 is, and there is 1, 2, 3, 4 5-minute sections left of the clock. And I know that 5 times 4 is 20, so it is 22, and in this case it is 22:07. If I look at the next clock, the long minute hand is still pointing at the 8. So I know that when the long minute hand is pointing at the 8, it's 20 minutes to the new hour. In this case, it would be 20 minutes to 12. And finally, the clock at the bottom, the long minute hand is pointing at the 11, and I can see there is 1 section of the clock left to go, 1 part of 5 minutes. So it is 5 minutes to 5, because the hour hand has almost got to the 5, but not quite. The more you practice looking at the clock and seeing what it looks like at different times of the day, the more confident you will be. People that know how to tell the time very confidently can look at a clock and just know what the time is because they have a memory of what the clock looks like at different times of the day. So keeping practicing and looking at lots of clocks is definitely the key to becoming successful at telling the time.